We are in Genesis, I forgot to tell Paul, Genesis 16. Would you pull that up for us so that we can project it up on the screen? But you'll have lots of time because I want to introduce this a little bit. And I want to start a little bit strange with a story that happened in 1986. It's a true story. Mary Beth Whitehead had signed a contract to carry a baby for William and Elizabeth Stern. Using her egg and William Stern's sperm, she would give birth to a baby girl, but when she did, she refused to give the little baby up to the people that paid her to carry this baby. So that was basically the story. After a long and heavy publicized, I have to admit I don't remember this, but some of you might, Whitehead's parents, the ones that were this girl was carrying the baby for them, the parental rights were actually revoked, and Elizabeth Stern adopted the baby. So, but a year later, the adoption was invalidated, and Whitehead won visitation rights. So it's actually just the person that the surrogate mom, she first won, then she lost. Or no, the other way around. She first lost, then she kind of won visitation rights. But it wasn't, so the mother, so these other people, it was Baby M, they raised her. And on her 18th birthday, Baby M, known as Baby M, otherwise known as Melissa Stern, legally terminated her biological mom's parental rights, thus honoring her real parents, the ones that raised her. Now, this is an interesting story. Why do I bring it up? Well, it kind of almost doesn't have much to do with today, and yet it has everything to do with today, because I was sharing this story because we're about to see kind of a similar event in Abram and Sarah's life. But quite different, because the culture is different and a much different outcome than sort of a mixed up, confusing scene that I've just described to you. In the time when Sarah and Abraham lived, and they were wandering people, they were they moved around in tents with all their animals and stuff. Having children was not being able to have children was very difficult, especially on a woman, but for the family, it was a difficult thing. Any couple, even today, who's not been able to conceive and have children, knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like if, I know people that have not been able to baby. Well, we don't know. Maybe the baby is not to come. But the pressures on a mom and a couple to perform, to deliver this baby is, even in our culture, is big. But it's nothing. It's nothing compared to the culture that Sarah and Abram were from. Imagine Sarah and Abram. The entire world depends on them bringing this baby boy into the world. The world depends on it, and not only that, but God himself depends on them. And they're not delivering. Or perhaps God is not delivering. You can't just give them sort of the advice, get a puppy and then it'll happen. The circumstances surrounding this is big. They're old. They don't have a lot of time. And it's understandable that they're having doubts, because years and years pass by and things are happening, but there is no baby. As we will learn, barrenness, that word barrenness, in the time when Abraham and Sarah, the time of this story, would have been much worse than today. Somebody saying, well, I just can't have a baby. No big deal. You can just go and adopt. But it carried a huge stigma with it.
just what that word means. You know, barrenness, right? You're dried up. You lack worth because you're barren and you're not delivering. You cannot produce. And so, looking at the life of Abe, that's one thing that I want to look at, but another thing is that many would look at his life as an example. This incredible example of a man with faith. And he is. In fact, not only is he is for the Christian world, but he is for a couple of other mainstream religions. People look up to Abraham. But today we will see, and what makes this so difficult and raw, is that we will see just how flawed this man really was. But that will encourage us in the end. On the surface, not so bad. When you read today's translation, even the Old King James, you will, it really makes it palatable for us to understand what actually happened. But I want to bring us there, as painful as it might be, a little bit, just so we can see something. Deep down, what happened in this scene that we're about to read is actually horrifying. Horrifying. You're going to ask, why is this in the Bible? Why would we even want this in the Bible? It's disgusting, it's confusing, it's offensive and demeaning to women, and it is no way that it's going to help our Christian faith, our Christian witness. And yet, it's part of who we are, part of where Jesus came from, part of the blessing that was given to Abraham. So as we read, I'm just going to read a long portion of Scripture, and I have to really start talking faster. I want to get to the end of this, because at the end, I want you to look at 4 things. So, I want you to see that we're going to look at an abused slave girl. Literally, an abused slave girl. We're going to look at a frustrated old woman. You're going to see that in this story. We're going to look at this old man who is totally, in a way, unfulfilled in his life. Like nothing is happening. He's like 80 years old, 80-something. He's disappointed. He certainly would feel like he is a failure, especially in this regard. So that's what we're going to look at. Pay attention as I read this for us, and you can follow there. I'm going to read it, and then you will see these 4 characters in there. I didn't tell you the last one. It's a very special character. He's a special friend, but a bit mysterious. You'll see it. So Genesis 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. That's the slave girl. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children." Take note of that. Underline restrained. She's actually saying God has stopped me from having kids, but God was doing anything but. "Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abraham, take note, heeded the voice of Sarai. It's actually almost the same words when Adam heeded the voice of, hearkened the voice of Eve. And then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. After Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So 10 years. So it wasn't like he just gave up right away. 10 years. And now this happened. Then Sarah said to Abram, and I'll express this a bit later, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace." It actually says, "I put her into your lap, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abram said to Sarah, as if this wasn't bad enough, "She's your slave, do what you want." She said, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. And when Sarai dealt harshly, that means she beat her, with her, she fled from her presence. Hagar fled, obviously, because she's afraid for her life. Now the angel of the Lord found her, Hagar, by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from? And where are you going? You see, I'd like to do a series just on this one chapter. Just think about it. Isn't that a good question for us? Where have you come from? Where are you going? What a question. Only God can ask that question. And she said, I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Then the angel encouraged her. The angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with a child. And you know how close this sounds when the angel of the Lord was talking to Mary? Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. Now that's not close, this part, right? His hand shall be against every man, and every man against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, and she said this, she just identified, you are the God who sees. For she said, I have also here seen him who sees me. She says, in other words, I've heard you. I know who you are. I know what's going on. You've seen me. I know who you are, and I know what you told me. I believe it. Therefore, the well was called Bir Lai Roi. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered. Apparently, it may still be there. So Hagar bore Abraham a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abraham. That's God's word for us. So an abused slave girl. That's the first one I want to look at. We see that when God appears, it's understandably, right, that when God's promise do not get fulfilled, Sarah and Abe take matters in their own hands, right? It's understandable. 10 years. So they're thinking, it's not going to happen. Maybe they're even sort of justifying it. Maybe God wants us to do something. I know he said that, but doubts start to come, right? And in verse 1 it said, Sarah, Abram's wife, was unable to have a child. I mean, it's 10 years, 10 long years. They lived in Canaan. They tried for 10 long years. They tried, and they didn't have a baby, nothing. And they are not getting younger. So in verse 2 it says, Sarah said, see, the Lord has restrained. I mean, they're actually reasoning out, maybe God is just not letting it happen. He's actually stopping it from happening, me from bearing children. I am barren. And this, as I mentioned before, carried this huge, huge stigma in determining the value of a woman back then, right? It's just the frustration and the pressure is unimaginable because you feel like you are useless. You're useless. You're barren. You cannot determine your purpose, right? And this kind of pressure kind of led them to use this slave girl Hagar to be a surrogate and conceive a baby for them. So in verse 3 then we see this. Abram's wife giving Hagar, the slave girl, to her husband, Abram's wife giving Hagar, the slave girl, to her husband, Abram, to have a child with her. That's what we see. So you got to understand, though. Okay, you think this is really, kind of weird, right? But it isn't, because as weird as we think it is, right? In that culture, what Sarah was doing and Abram was did, was common and legal. That's what people could do with their slave. Sarah was property. She belonged to, Hagar. Sarah owned Hagar, and so she was Sarah's property, literally. So the baby, when Hagar had the baby, would automatically, there would be no question, no court case, automatically belonged to Sarah. So it would be logical for her to think that this would be a way of doing it, because it was common in their culture. In their culture. Not for God, but in their culture. So this might have gone something like this. You've had this conversation, I'm sure, if you're a guy. Dear, are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want me to do? Yeah. Yes. I want you to do this, Abe. Yes, yes, yes. Can't you see I'm in pain? Don't you see how I feel? Of course I want you to do this. And then you see in verse 4, right? Abe went to Hagar, right? You can plug your ears if you don't want to hear this, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. I'll explain that in a minute, but another way of saying this is that after this actually happened, everything changed. Today, that will happen too. You think it's the right thing, but then after, everything changed. Everything changed. And suddenly, Hagar, the slave girl, has a different attitude towards Sarah, the mistress, the master, the mistress, her mistress. So then Sarah said to Abram, how many times have you heard this? This is your fault! Abe, this is your fault! Look at what happened! Ah! But dear, it's your fault! I remember Joanne was delivering one of our kids. I think it was Matthew. And right in the middle of push, she said to me, this is your fault! You caused this! Dear, I'm never doing this again! But then we had Michael. And then she said, no, I mean it! This is your fault! Okay, this is your fault. And then Sarah said to Abram, this is your fault. Okay, so he said something that is, she says, I put my slave girl in your arms. Now that she knows she is pregnant with your kid, she despises me. She's changed now. And what she actually said wasn't exactly like that. She said, I took the little and I put her in your lap. That's what she said. And now that's what's happened. So it's the kind of thing that's happening from the father, literally, right? That's what it translates like. And if it wasn't graphic enough for you so far, our hero of our faith, this is how he responds. Well, dear, you're right. She is, after all, your slave girl. You deal with it. You deal with it then. And so it says that she dealt with her harshly. What it really meant was she beat the daylights out of her. And she fled, and she ran. And Hagar ran. I'm hoping that you're picking up on some stuff here. You know, the realness, this intensity, the emotions, the feelings, the rawness, the real part of this. Sarah is really suffering. This is not an act. She really feels this way. What had just changed. I mean, she wanted it that way. She feels this way. Well, everything had changed. Right? Those clear-cut lines of who Sarah was and who Hagar was, the master-slave relationship, are now overlapping. I remember one time, and I can't tell too many stories, I could, but we were, just the one time that I've ever been to India, so it doesn't sound like I travel to India all the time, but there's one time we're in India, the only time we've ever been to India, and I didn't know that you cannot rent a car there. You have to rent a car and a driver, and we had a driver with us. And it was fairly inexpensive, and it was a good thing that I didn't try to drive, because I wouldn't be here talking to you now, because I'd be dead, because it's not an easy place to drive. But one day we decided that we would go for a 2 or 3 day trip, so we could take the driver with us. And as we were traveling, we pulled over to have lunch. And we wanted the driver, we are used to here, so we thought, we're going to have lunch. And he doesn't want to sit with us. And we thought, what's wrong with us? Well, it wasn't nothing wrong with us. He's not going to sit with us. Well, we said, well, we feel bad. So we gave him some money, and he took the money, and he put it in his pocket, but he didn't spend it on lunch. And he's just sitting there. And it's just so weird to us in our culture. We're sitting here eating, and I have people from India with me. They were normal people from India. It wasn't just a white guy there. We were all different cultures. And this other guy, nice guy, is sitting over there, and I just can't get used to it. And somebody said, no, that's normal. They don't eat with us. Okay? Because there is this hierarchy, there is this division, and there is no gray area. We sit at this table, they sit at that table. That's it. That's the caste system. Now, in your culture, even our Asian culture and other cultures, somebody who's above you, who's your boss, or who's somebody of authority over you, you don't look straight in the eye. Now, possibly, I don't know in Laos today, but it's generally that you would take a position of humility. You would look more down. You don't need to. Is that true? I don't know, but I think that's how it is. You would take this position because that person is above you, of authority. Well, I think Hagar changed her position. She looked at Sarah in the eye. That's what's happening here. And suddenly Sarah realizes, this is getting mixed up. This is not what I signed up for. And so there's these emotions coming. That's what I'm thinking is happening. So what's our lesson here? Well, huge, because we could just, for the rest of this story, we are hugely challenged by what's happening here. Because this crazy stuff is in the Bible. And like I said, it's kind of disgusting in a way. Why do we need this in the Bible? This stuff in a way is the slavery, the oppression, these feelings that I just showed you between Sarah and her surrogate lady and her slave as well, and the confusion is real life. And so why is it in the Bible? Because God is real and deals with real life. And our sin nature is real, very real, because he paid dearly for it. It doesn't make sense, though, and it's very, very challenging, and you may have to process it later, if you see the Bible as mostly a book of good moral stories and examples that we should emulate and we should follow. Then it doesn't make sense. Then why is this in the Bible? There's a problem. But is that what the Bible is about? It's not. That's not what the book of the Bible is about. The Bible is a record of real people who receive God's grace. Real people who don't deserve God's grace. Broken people. That's why Jesus came. But they received God's grace. Primarily, that's what we have. That's the record we have. And it would not be authentic if it was just a book of all these good examples. That's what religion is.
Then you can read step 1, step 2, step 3, and you think now God is happy, and then He'll throw you a bowl. He'll throw you something. It's kind of like I was thinking this morning driving here. I was thinking, that's what religion really is, isn't it?